I wanted to create a language that would describe what I was feeling. And how do you do that with shapes and form and color and composition? And so that's what I've spent the next 40 years trying to uncover and understand. Mi nombre es Emilio Lobato. Soy un artista de Colorado y este otoño se presenta A Mi Manera, My Way. Bienvenidos. I grew up in a little village in San Pablo, Colorado, which is about 7 miles from the tiny town of San Luis, the oldest town in Colorado. It's primarily old Spanish settlement. The community, I went to high school and graduated with 25 people, so very small farming community, very humble, very agricultural. And that has played a huge role in my work, especially the first 20 or 25 years or so. I was married for 32 years. My wife suffered for 12 years, battled breast cancer. And after she passed, I had this epiphany to do this show. The Measure of a Man was a body of work that I did shortly after she passed, questioning my role as a man and as a caretaker. And realize that these are questions that are universal. That many people ask themselves these questions: do I measure up? Because we live in a time and a society where we measure everything. And so I had this idea to create works with antique folding rulers. I understand they're used in building. They're electricians' rulers that fold out, that don't conduct electricity. And I used to see them around the farm and in people's, in the garage and storage. And they're so beautiful and they're nostalgic. That's another important part of my work, is nostalgia. But I could create line and interest and texture with these antique rulers, but also tell the story about how we measure everything, that everything has to be put into units and described and accumulated. And it was mostly a commentary on being a caretaker and having your patient die. And so I was going through some deep psychological evaluation. About 10 years into this 32-year relationship, I started having feelings I didn't quite understand. I had a cousin who committed suicide. He was bipolar and had suffered a long time. At his funeral, everybody was talking in whispers about how much mental illness there was in the family. And I had suffered from depression for many years. Thought I should get help for this. I did some therapy. In that process, it turns out, oh my gosh, I'm gay. What do I do with this information now? This is something I'm feeling. It's something that had not really expressed itself before, but it's a thing now. And I did a lot of research, thought I would come out at that time, but then decided to stay married. I love my wife, I love my young children, and so I thought this could be my little secret. It's an itch that I can scratch discreetly, and so I never made it an issue. And so I spent the next 20 years in the closet. I think being an artist helped me in that some of my behaviors could be explained as bohemia. I waited a couple years after she passed, and then I came out to my children. The Measure of a Man show was, trying to describe myself as a caretaker and as a man, didn't really have a gay undertone or theme. The first show I had after she passed was a show that was called The Twin Feather Meditations. But it was a body of work about being a twin feather spirit. Some of the research that I encountered when I was thinking of coming out talked about how in Native American worldview, people who are gay and transgendered are considered twin feather spirits because they embody both male and female aspects. It has nothing to do with sex, but about the whole aura and trajectory of a person. And in the past, these people who were part of the tribe were very honored members of the tribe. There was a role for them because they embodied both male and female aspects. They were considered shamans and gifted people, and there was a real role for them in the community. And I found that absolutely fascinating, and I think that gave me strength for my own coming out. And so I did this body of work that was quite literally pieces that had feathers to describe that phenomenon, and it was my artistic and public coming out, my professional coming out, so to speak. About a year after the pandemic sort of wrapped up, so to speak, if it did, I was offered an exhibition with Bill Havu. And I realized that as I was preparing for this exhibition, to start to create the work for that exhibition, that because of supply chain shortages, there was no adhesives and varnishes that are critical in my process. And so I had to recalibrate. I thought, what am I going to use now if I can't use collage and oil paint the way I have been using them? And I remembered some work that I saw 30 or 40 years ago, an Oregon artist who had done some work with rubber. And it had always stuck in the back of my head, and I thought, I have to. And so in that moment, when my regular materials were not available, I thought, I'll experiment with rubber. I found a source locally for industrial rubber, and it is sold by weight. It's really interesting. But so I found this incredible source for rubber, and I started using it almost exactly like I use my collage elements in my work. So I started cutting it, folding it, shaping it, and tacking it down to a surface because I didn't have adhesive and couldn't do that successfully. And as the show sort of unfolded, it became obvious to me that really what I was exploring and thinking about was this post-apocalyptic world that we live in now. The color's very dramatic. The material really records elements of its manufacture. So there's these things that are totally beyond my control that I can use in the composition or as a focal point, or is very subtle. But it also speaks to the fact that, we all came through this pandemic, sort of reacting to a situation, not having any control of what was going on. Or what was going to happen to us. I mean, there was that unpredictability. And there were many, many moments where it felt, the time that we have lived through the pandemic, where it felt hopeless and bleak and dark. And that's a real part of our experience. In the mid-90s, when I started to explore my gayness and tried to understand that, I did a body of work, which I think I worked on for about 2 years, where I was trying to describe what I was feeling about deciding to be closeted and feeling at the time like, you're the only one that's gay. You're by yourself, or your secret isolates you from reality and from people, because this very real part of yourself has to be contained, or I had decided it should be contained. And so I did this abstracted figurative series where they were isolated male forms in this composition, in this space, surrounded by what was, I used, textures and drips and the paint to be expressive of tears, of sorrow, of pain, of turmoil. Because even though the closet was my choice, it was not always a comfortable place. And so feeling isolated and feeling singular was a big part of that. Growing up in the San Luis Valley, so far from everything, it felt like I was really far from civilization, from opportunities, from activities. And so I have explored that theme of isolation in my work for many years, is how do feeling isolated and solitary are a very human condition. We all feel it at times in our life, on and off, to varying degrees. And for me, I wanted to describe that experience because it was so big and so real and very formative to who I've become as an adult. I grew up with this very real trauma of being marginalized in a community, in an already small community. How do you overcome that? How do you heal from that? And so I thought that my art, trying to create this nonverbal language, would be the way that I heal, the way that what I had to contribute to the art world, for example.